Hello, I'm Anthony Cummings, and I'm a faculty member in the Geospatial Information Sciences program in the School of Economic, Political, and Policy Sciences at the University of Texas at Dallas. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the Geospatial Information Sciences program in terms of what we offer and an overview of some of our faculty members and perhaps some of the reasons why you should become a part of our program. I'll then tell you a little bit about my work, what are some of the things I focus on, and hopefully that will inspire you to want to become a part of our program. The Geospatial Information Sciences program at the University of Texas at Dallas offers the full range of ways in which you can be qualified at the university level in Geospatial Information Sciences program. We offer a certificate and bachelor's in Geographic Information Sciences. And to move beyond the bachelor's, you can obtain a master's and PhD in Geographic Information Sciences. Our scholars and their work is well known globally. For instance, Dr. Brian Berry, one of the leaders in the quantitative revolution, is a faculty member in our program. In addition to Dr. Berry, Dr. Daniel Griffith, one of the early scholars in spatial statistics, is also part of our program. Dr. Michael Stiefelsdorf and Dr. Youngwon Chun, they're also part of our program, and their work in spatial statistics is well known across the world. Dr. Feng Chu is a scholar in remote sensing. His work and his contribution to remote sensing is recognized globally, as is Professor Mei Wan, whose work in spatial temporal GIS is also well known. Our program has been ranked for excellence in spatial analysis and statistics by Geographical Perspectives, and we host an ESERI Development Center here at the University of Texas at Dallas. In terms of where you can go once you would have obtained your qualifications as a part of our program, our bachelor's graduates, 72% of them obtain jobs almost immediately upon graduation. The remainder usually move on to higher education to complete a master's and then a PhD. Once they have graduated with their master's degree, 97.6% of our students find jobs immediately upon graduation. And all of our PhD graduates to date have moved on to work either in academia or in the industry. So we do have a very good reputation in terms of how our students do once they graduate. And I want to tell you a little bit about my work. And as I noted, my name is Anthony Cummings, and I work primarily on measuring the impacts of land use and land cover change on the livelihoods of forest-dependent peoples and the wildlife with which they are associated. I work in the country of Guyana. Guyana is South America's only English-speaking country, and that's where I'm from. So my work takes me right back to the place that I was born and raised, and I'm concerned with trying to understand how things like commercial scale gold mining and commercial scale logging impacts both the people and the wildlife that are found there. So I have a number of tools, a number of ways, if you like, in which I go about trying to measure the impacts of land use and land cover change. The first is using this class of plants that are defined as multiple use plants. Multiple use plants, by my definition, will be a species or perhaps even a genera of plants in which more than one uses intersect. For instance, to show you in this graphic here, a single plant species may be used for wildlife food, meaning the wildlife that are hunted by indigenous peoples may come to this species and they may eat its fruit for food. Indigenous peoples, in turn, may use the leaves, the stems, the barks, perhaps even the roots of those plants as a part of their traditional practices. It may be used, for instance, as a medicine. And then the third use that may intersect in these plant species that make them multiple use are timber uses. So for instance, a plant species may have high value on the timber market. So you may have these three potential uses intersecting in a single plant species. My work attempts to understand the distribution of such plants and how they may be impacted by things like commercial logging. The second strand of my work in trying to measure the impacts of land use and land cover change on people and wildlife is measuring human-wildlife interactions, understanding how people are likely to come into conflict with wildlife, for instance, and how this may be impacted by global processes, for example, changes in economic conditions. I'll show you a few photographs here. So the top photograph is a photograph of raw gold. Whenever there are changes in global markets, for instance, given the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, as a consequence of the changes in economic conditions, the price for gold reached record highs. For the first time in history, the price of gold was beyond $2,000 per ounce. This meant that a number of people now have an incentive to move into the forest for gold mining purposes. Folks in what we describe as the global north, investors, for example, are beginning to find gold increasingly attractive to place their money in, as opposed to the stock market, for instance. What this means is that more and more people are going to move into the forest for gold. When they move into the forest, commercial loggers, commercial gold miners in particular, they are much more likely to come into contact with the wildlife that live in these forests. This photograph here is a jaguar that was trapped by a gold miner. And this is really important for a number of reasons. For the gold miner, having a dog and other domestic animals is really important. In the case of the dog, it serves a number of purposes. Two main purposes I'm going to talk about. The first is providing hunting services. For many gold miners, they tend to move ahead of the social services. For instance, they may move into places where there isn't that line of food supply from commercial marketers already. So for him, being able to secure his own food in the forest becomes really important. And the dog serves that purpose. The dog helps him to hunt so he can have food. The second purpose that the dog serves for the gold miner is security. Dogs are going to sense when a stranger approaches the gold mining camp, and it alerts the gold miner to the presence of the stranger, and now he's ready to protect himself and his camp. Unfortunately for the dog, when the jaguar observes the dog in the forest, the jaguar sees a potential prey. He sees lunch. This then brings the jaguar and gold miner into direct conflict. The jaguar wants to kill the dog. The gold miner wants to protect the dog. The outcome is usually something like this, where the gold miner now traps the jaguar in the attempt to protect his dog. In this case, this jaguar was killed. So this is an unfortunate outcome. So trying to understand where these occurrences are happening across the forest is something that I'm trying to do. In addition, I'm trying to understand how the presence of jaguars, so the top photograph here is one of my most prized possession. It was collected on a camera trap. The bottom photograph here is a tapir, common jaguar prey. And I'm trying to understand how land use and changes in land use is impacting the density of jaguars as the predator relative to the prey species that are present in these forests. The third strand of work that I engage in Guyana is mapping with indigenous peoples, mapping their landscapes using unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, or commonly known as drone. And a newer term for these is unoccupied aerial vehicles. And what I do, I build drones. So the photographs at the top here, I'm holding a workshop where I'm training indigenous young people to build a drone. And the photograph on the bottom right is one of the drones that I built, and here we're preparing to fly a drone. We fly these drones over what we describe as Swidden landscapes. So this is a Swidden agriculture plot. Indigenous peoples engage in Swidden agriculture. They cultivate their lands for a period of time that is shorter than the time they allow their lands to rest. So in this case, they may plant their farms for about 9 to 12 months or so, and they're planting cassava, Manioc esculenta, and then they allow the forest to regrow for perhaps 20 to 40 years or so. In this case, in my work, we're just tracking change within a growing season. So these photographs were taken in June 2016, and then we take the second set of photographs in September 2016. We can then look at change that has occurred within these Swidden plots, and we can use these data to track how the crop is developing over time and use it to begin predicting, for example, how the crop is performing relative to changes in weather conditions, for instance, El Nino, and what this may mean for the availability of food for indigenous peoples. To go back here, the availability of food. So when indigenous peoples grow their crops, the animals that they hunt also eat some of these crops. So there's this symbiotic relationship that's being fostered between indigenous peoples and the wildlife around them. So trying to understand the amount of food they're growing, how much is available for wildlife, also gives us a sense of how changes may impact these relationships. The fourth area of my work that I want to talk to you about today is understanding how crime is moving across the Guyanese landscape where I study and what this may mean for indigenous peoples. So to do this, I've been mapping the distribution of crime across Guyana. So the first map that I'm showing you here is a map of crime incidents, the incidents of violent crime. So each one of these dots represent a crime location. I mapped these with a group of my students here at the University of Texas at Dallas, and we use these data to identify areas that have a higher density of crime, what we describe as hotspots, and areas of lower densities of crime. These green polygons are representing indigenous people's lands. So these are green polygons are indigenous people's lands. And now we're beginning to understand how different types of crimes, and certainly the weapons that are used to commit these crimes, are moving across the Guyanese landscapes. So we're looking at how crime is moving from Georgetown and the coastal plain, and whether it's moving closer to indigenous people's lands. And we've been tracking two types of weapons that are used to commit crime. So the first are these bladed weapons, and the second are firearms. We're beginning to see that over time, crime is moving closer and closer to indigenous people's lands. And this may have implications in the future, both for the committal of crime within indigenous people's landscapes, and also for the wildlife that are found within these landscapes. In particular, if firearms are moving closer to indigenous people's landscapes, for instance, it will have implications for wildlife hunting and wildlife trade. So this is what I engage in as a scholar. This is what my work is about. And I've now told you as well about the fantastic scholars we have within our program. I hope with this video, you will be inspired to come and join us and study for one of our offerings in the Geospatial Information Sciences program at the University of Texas at Dallas. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed the guest lecture video from our esteemed UT Dallas faculty. Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Maxwell, Assistant Provost in the Office of Community College Relations and a faculty member in Public and Nonprofit Management. I would like to briefly share information about UT Dallas. UTD is just shy of 30,000 students, yet we pride ourselves on providing opportunities for all our students to connect with faculty, as you might find at much smaller institutions. In fact, almost 80% of our undergraduate classes have fewer than 50 students. UTD also offers scholarships for transfer students. We encourage you to learn more through our virtual and in-person campus tours, Scholars Day, and Preview Fridays. Students who may be considering UT Dallas can also schedule a pre-admissions counseling appointment, and we hope you explore our guaranteed tuition plan, the Comic Connection. We look forward to seeing you at the University of Texas at Dallas.